I never thought I'd meet someone important to me over a couple of scruffy cats, but life's funny like that. It all started on one of those drizzly Tuesday evenings when I was out doing my usual routine, feeding the stray cats near my apartment. Yeah, I'm that guy now, the one who carries around little containers of tuna and dry food for the raggedy felines that hang around the corner of 5th and Pine. It's not like I planned on becoming a cat guy. It just kinda happened after I noticed how thin and scared some of them looked. Plus, it gave me a reason to get out of the house after work, instead of binge watching the same shows on Netflix. That night, the sky was a dull gray, and the sidewalk was slick from the earlier rain. I had my usual bag of cat food slung over my shoulder, and my jacket was doing its best to keep out the chill. I was crouched down near the corner dumpster, pouring some food into a little pile when I noticed him. At first, I thought maybe he was another stray cat feeder like me, but the way he was carefully placing bits of food out with a kind of quiet patience made me stop in my tracks. He looked up as I approached, like he'd been caught doing something he didn't want anyone to see, but was also hoping I wouldn't say anything rude. His eyes were the sort of blue that catches you off guard. Not flashy, just calm and honest. He gave me a small, almost shy smile and nodded toward the food. Hey, I didn't expect to see someone else doing this around here. I laughed softly. Yeah, me neither. I guess these street cats have a bigger fan club than I thought. He shrugged. I don't really think of it as a fan club. Just trying to make sure they don't go hungry, you know? There was something about how casually he said that. Like, it was the most normal thing in the world to care so much about stray cats that roam the city streets. I introduced myself, Matt, and he said his name was Jamie. We stood there for a few minutes, watching as a few of the cats cautiously approached the food. One of them, a skinny tabby with a crooked ear, seemed to recognize Jamie and rubbed against his leg like they'd known each other for years. I was curious. You come here often? Jamie smiled again, but this time it seemed a little sad. I guess I do. It's a quiet spot. Helps me think. I nodded, understanding more than I expected. For me, feeding the cats was the same. Just a little ritual to slow down and feel like I was doing something good. The city was overwhelming sometimes. Quiet corners like this felt like little pockets of peace. We ended up talking for a while about the cats, the neighborhood, and how sometimes the smallest things, like feeding a street animal, can feel like a lifeline. I don't know when exactly it happened, but by the time we parted ways, something had shifted. I wasn't just some guy feeding stray cats anymore. Suddenly, this routine felt like the start of something I didn't expect, but kind of hoped for. And that's where it all began, with a few scraps of cat food and a chance encounter in the rain. But trust me, it only gets more complicated and a lot more interesting from here. After that first night, I found myself looking forward to those evening walks more than I expected. Not just because I knew the cats would be around, but because I hoped Jamie would be there too. It was weird, feeling that kind of anticipation for someone you barely knew, all because of a shared mission to feed street cats. The next time we met, it was almost like we slipped into a routine. I'd show up with the food, and Jamie would already be there, setting out bowls and keeping an eye on the skittish ones. We never rushed into deep talks right away. Most of our conversations started with casual comments about the cats or the weather, but slowly they got more personal. One evening, Jamie mentioned that the tabby cat with the crooked ear was his favorite. She's been around longer than any of the others, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I've been feeding her for a couple of years now. She's tough, but she's got scars to prove it. I was surprised he'd been doing this so long. That's dedication. He smiled, but there was a softness in his eyes that made me realize there was more behind it. It's not just about the cats. It's a sort of therapy, I guess. When things get messy in my world, I come out here. They don't judge, and it's simple. Feed them, watch them eat, maybe pet one if they'll let me. I could relate to that feeling more than I wanted to admit. I'd been through my share of messy too. Recently moved to this city to get away from a toxic job and a relationship that left me drained. Feeding these cats was a way to reclaim some control, some kindness in an otherwise chaotic time. One night, after we'd finished feeding the cats and the last bowl was empty, Jamie hesitated like he wanted to say something. We were still sitting on the curb, the streetlights casting a soft glow and the city noises dimming down. "I know this might sound weird," he started, "but I look forward to this, to seeing you here. It's nice. You make this whole thing less lonely." I felt a flush creep up my neck. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it, but I think Jamie was nervous too. "I feel the same," I said quietly. "It's weird how something as small as feeding cats can feel like the best part of my day." He laughed, a quiet, genuine sound. Yeah, who knew street cats could be so romantic? We ended up sitting there for a while longer, just talking about random stuff. Favorite movies, bad dates, dreams that seemed too big or too far off. The city around us faded into the background, and it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Over the next few weeks, our little ritual became something I looked forward to more than anything else. We started timing our visits so we wouldn't miss each other. Sometimes, Jamie would bring extra blankets or a thermos of coffee if the weather was cold. I learned that he worked at a small bookstore nearby, loved old vinyl records, and had a knack for remembering obscure trivia. And he listened. Really listened. When I talked about my own messy past and what I was trying to build for myself now. One night, a couple of the cats disappeared, probably chased off by some neighborhood dogs, and Jamie looked genuinely upset. "I hate it when they're scared," he said, voice low. "It's like they've been through so much already. I just want them to be safe." I reached out and touched his arm. A small gesture, but it felt natural. "They're lucky to have you," I told him. "And so am I." That moment lingered longer than it probably should have, but neither of us pulled away. Instead, Jamie smiled that shy smile again, and I felt like maybe this was more than just a shared kindness towards stray cats. Maybe it was the start of something real between us. The city felt less cold after that, the noise less overwhelming. And those little street cats, they became a part of our story, a kind of secret thread weaving us together in a way I hadn't expected when I first started tossing food on the sidewalk on a rainy Tuesday. But, as with any good story, things didn't just stay sweet and simple. There were complications ahead. Stuff that made me wonder if this connection was strong enough to survive the real world outside our quiet cat-feeding corner. And trust me, that's when the story really gets interesting. The next few days after that night felt like walking on eggshells, but in the best way possible. I kept replaying that moment when our hands almost touched, the way the streetlight caught the slight blush on Jamie's cheeks. It was like the whole city shrunk to just the two of us, and those handful of scrappy cats. But life doesn't hand out neat moments like that without some wrinkles, does it? One evening, I showed up a little earlier than usual, hoping to surprise Jamie. I figured maybe I'd bring some extra food, or a new toy for the cats. Instead, I found the spot empty except for the cats themselves, scattered and nervous, but no Jamie in sight. I waited. 10 minutes. 20. Cold creeping in and my stomach twisting. I pulled out my phone and shot him a quick message. "Hey, you okay? Didn't see you at our usual spot?" No reply. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but my mind started spinning with every possibility. Was he avoiding me? Did I say something wrong? Or was something else going on? The next day, I bumped into him near the bookstore where he worked. He looked tired, a little pale, and when he saw me, he gave a tight smile. "Hey, Matt," he said, voice low. "Hey, Jamie, you all right? You missed feeding last night." He shrugged, glancing away. "Yeah, just busy, stuff at work." I wanted to press, but I could tell he wasn't ready, so I just nodded. "If you need to talk, I'm around." Jamie's smile softened. "Thanks, that means a lot." It wasn't until a few days later that he finally opened up. We were sitting on a bench near the park, the city buzzing quietly around us, kids playing in the distance, and the smell of fresh coffee wafting from a nearby cart. "I've been dealing with some family stuff," he confessed, staring at the pavement. "My parents don't really get the whole me thing. It's been rough. They want me to just, move on and stop feeding strays like they're some kind of project." I looked at him, surprised. "That's a lot." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just wasting my time, or if I should be focusing on real things, jobs, relationships, the kind of stuff they expect." I reached out, gently brushing a stray hair from his forehead. "Jamie, what you're doing isn't a waste. Caring about those cats, about anything, is real. And if people can't see that, it's their loss." He looked up, eyes glistening just a bit. Thanks, Matt, you really get it. That moment felt like a turning point. We weren't just two guys feeding cats. There was a vulnerability between us now, a shared understanding that maybe, just maybe, we could be something more than friends. Of course, real life loves to throw curveballs. A week later, I was walking home from work when I saw Jamie arguing with someone on the street corner. His voice was raised, tense. The other person was a tall, stern-looking guy. I guessed from context that it must be one of Jamie's parents. I stopped, not wanting to intrude, but the conversation was impossible to ignore. You need to stop wasting your time with these animals and focus on your future, the man snapped. This feeding nonsense is childish. Jamie's jaw was tight. This isn't childish to me. It's what keeps me sane, what makes me happy. The man shook his head. You're being selfish. Before I could decide if I should step in, Jamie turned and spotted me watching. His expression was a mix of embarrassment and something else. Hope? I walked over slowly. Everything okay? His eyes flicked between me and his father, and then he looked tired, defeated. Not really. I placed a hand on his shoulder. You don't have to deal with this alone. Later that night, we sat on my couch, the cats lounging nearby, and Jamie told me more about the pressure he faced, how his family didn't understand his quiet way of life, how they wanted him to chase bigger, louder dreams, and how that made him feel like he had to hide parts of himself. I shared my own story too, the breakup, the job stress, the loneliness. And it hit me then how much we had in common, even if our lives looked different on paper. You know, I said, maybe feeding those cats is more than therapy. Maybe it's a symbol of who we are. People trying to care for something fragile in a world that doesn't always make space for it. Jamie smiled, the kind of genuine smile that made my chest tighten. I like that. We didn't say it out loud, but something shifted between us. The unspoken acknowledgement that this wasn't just about cats anymore. It was about us. About finding comfort and connection in a city that often feels cold and indifferent. The next time we went out to feed the strays, Jamie surprised me with a little gift, a small collar with a tiny bell for the crooked-ear tabby. She deserves something shiny, he said. I caught his hand as he handed it to me. So do you. He looked at me, a flicker of something tender and nervous in his eyes. Maybe we could, do this together more often. Not just feeding cats, but stuff. Like hanging out. I grinned, heart pounding. I'd like that. And just like that, what started as two guys feeding stray cats became the start of a much bigger story, one filled with hope, hesitation, and the kind of connection I never saw coming on those rainy nights. Looking back now, I realized that sometimes love sneaks in through the smallest cracks, like sharing a bowl of food with a scrappy tabby or sitting in silence with someone who finally feels like home. And honestly, I can't wait to see where this goes next. After that night, things started to feel a little different between Jamie and me. It was subtle at first. Longer eye contact, lingering touches when we passed each other food bowls, a quiet warmth in the way we talked. We began to slide naturally into spending more time together outside of the cat feeding routine. And honestly, it was the kind of easy comfort I hadn't felt in a long time. One Saturday afternoon, Jamie texted me out of the blue. Found a new spot where some strays were spotted. Want to check it out together? I didn't hesitate. Absolutely. We met near the old warehouse district, a part of town I'd always avoided because it felt too run down and lonely. But with Jamie, the place seemed to take on a different vibe, less bleak, more like a little secret waiting to be discovered. We walked side by side, carrying bags of food and a couple of makeshift bowls. Jamie pointed out a small group of cats tucked behind some crates. These guys are a little jumpier, he warned, but they seem healthy. I watched how gently he moved, how patient he was coaxing the cats closer. There was a tenderness in the way he cared for them that made me want to be better at understanding him, better at showing him he wasn't alone. After we finished feeding, we found an old bench nearby and just sat, watching as the cats cautiously ate their fill. So, I said, breaking the silence, how long have you been feeding these cats? Like, really consistently? Jamie smiled, eyes soft. Almost 3 years now. It started when I moved here after college. I was lonely. And these cats became this anchor, I guess, something steady in a city that felt too big. I nodded, feeling the weight of that. 3 years is a long time to care for something on your own. That says a lot about you. He shrugged, but there was a hint of pride there. It's helped me more than I thought it would. We talked about other things then. Our favorite music, the worst dates we'd been on, the weird quirks that made us who we are. Jamie told me about his dream to someday open a little cat cafe, a place where people like us could find comfort and connection. I told him about my hopes of starting fresh, maybe even going back to school to finally finish that degree I'd put on hold. Eventually, the conversation drifted back to us, this weird, unexpected thing that had grown from sharing cat food on rainy nights. Matt, Jamie said quietly, I know things with my family are complicated. I don't want to mess this up because I'm scared. I reached for his hand. Jamie, I'm not going anywhere. We're figuring this out together. He squeezed my hand, and for the first time, there was no hesitation. But just as things were starting to feel right, life threw us a curveball. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from Jamie. Not the casual texts or friendly messages, but a voice trembling with something I hadn't heard before. Matt, can you meet me? I really need someone right now. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my jacket and headed out the door. When I arrived at the little park near my place, Jamie was sitting on a bench, eyes red and puffy. He looked utterly exhausted, like the weight of the world was pressing down on him. I had a fight with my parents, he said, voice barely above a whisper. They're threatening to cut me off financially if I don't stop feeding the cats and focus on getting a real job. They don't get why this matters to me. I sat beside him, feeling that familiar surge of protectiveness. That's awful, Jamie. You don't deserve to be treated like that. He let out a shaky breath. I'm scared, Matt. Scared that I'll lose them. And scared that maybe I'm just clinging to something that's holding me back. I took his hand again, steadying both of us. You're not holding back. You're being true to yourself, and that's brave. We'll figure this out together, no matter what. Jamie looked at me, a flicker of hope breaking through the sadness. Promise me something? He asked. Anything. Promise me you'll stay. That you'll keep feeding those cats with me, no matter what happens. I smiled, feeling a sudden rush of certainty. I promise. That night, as we parted ways, I realized that loving Jamie wasn't just about the easy moments. It was about standing beside him in the hard ones, the messy ones, the ones where the future felt uncertain. And honestly, I wouldn't trade it for anything. The days that followed that night were some of the most intense we'd faced. Jamie was caught in this tug of war between his family's expectations and what felt right to him, and I was trying to be the anchor he needed, even while I wrestled with my own uncertainties. It's funny how love can make you feel strong and vulnerable all at once. One afternoon, I found Jamie sitting on the stoop outside his apartment, a little mess of papers scattered around him like he was fighting some invisible battle. He looked up when I approached, eyes weary but grateful to see me. I've been trying to figure out a plan, he said, gesturing to the papers. Budgeting, job applications, trying to prove to them I can be responsible, but it feels like I'm losing myself in the process. I sat down beside him, pulling my jacket tighter against the chill. You're not losing yourself, Jamie. You're just trying to find a way to live on your own terms. He gave a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Feels like I'm betraying the cats, though. Like they're the last piece of me that's mine. I thought about that for a moment. Maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe there's a way to keep both. Like how we started with feeding those cats together. It's part of who you are, but it doesn't have to be all you are. Jamie looked at me then, like the idea was both terrifying and thrilling. The next weekend, we planned a little adventure, something to remind us why we'd stuck together through all this chaos. We took the subway out to a nearby park that was known for stray cats, but also had this great little cafe tucked in the corner. Jamie had suggested it months ago, calling it his dream in miniature. We spent the afternoon feeding cats, laughing as some of the more curious ones tried to climb onto our laps, and then settled into the cafe to warm up. The place was small, cozy, with walls covered in cat art and shelves stacked with books about animal rescue. Jamie grinned, eyes shining. One day, this could be us. I reached across the table and took his hand. I want that, not just the cafe, but us. Whatever, Us looks like. He squeezed my hand, and for a moment, the world outside melted away. But then reality crept back in. A few days later, Jamie got a call from his dad. I could hear the tension in his voice even before he let the voicemail play for me. Jamie, this is your father. We need you to come home this weekend. We need to talk. Jamie's face fell. They want me to come back to the family home. I think it's going to be a confrontation. I pulled him into a hug. Whatever happens, I'm here. The weekend was a whirlwind. Jamie left early Saturday morning, and I spent the hours pacing, waiting for news. When he came back, it was late Sunday night, and he looked exhausted but strangely calm. They gave me an ultimatum, he said quietly. Stop feeding the cats, get a real job, or don't expect any support from them. I saw the pain flicker behind his eyes. What are you gonna do? He shrugged, like the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I don't know. I want to fight, but it's hard when the people who are supposed to support you pull away. I reached out, brushing a finger across his cheek. You're not alone, Jamie. We'll figure this out together. That night we talked long into the early hours, making plans, talking about possibilities. Jamie considered moving in with me, trying to build a life independent of his family's expectations. I promised to help however I could. It wasn't easy. There were arguments, tears, moments of doubt. But through it all, feeding the cats became our ritual, a little act of defiance and hope. One evening, as we were setting out bowls for a new group of strays that had popped up near the community center, Jamie paused and looked at me. You know, he said, I never thought I'd find someone who understands this part of me, the part that just wants to care for the quiet things. I smiled, feeling something swell in my chest. I think I was the same way, until I met you. He laughed softly, and for a moment, the city felt less like a maze and more like home. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I believed we could walk it side by side. And honestly, that felt like everything. After those long nights of talking and planning, Jamie moved in with me. It wasn't some dramatic declaration or sweeping gesture. It was just one afternoon when he showed up at my door with 2 bags, a battered guitar case, and a hopeful look that made my insides flip in the best way. I'm tired of waiting for permission to live my life, he said, dropping one of the bags beside my couch. I want to do this on my own terms. It felt like a big step, not just for him, but for the quiet connection sliding between us. We weren't just 2 guys who fed stray cats anymore. We were building something real, even if it was scary and uncertain. The first few weeks were a kind of beautiful chaos, arranging furniture, figuring out how to share space, and settling into the rhythm of waking up to the soft rustling of cats prowling around the building. Jamie's presence filled the apartment with a lightness I didn't realize I'd been missing. One evening, after a particularly hectic day at work, I found Jamie sitting cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by the strays we'd started to care for more intentionally. He was softly humming as he gently brushed one of the cats, a sleek black one we'd started calling Luna. I sat down beside him, exhaustion weighing on me. You make this look easy. Jamie looked up, smiling tiredly. It's not about making it easy. It's about not giving up on the little things that matter. That stuck with me. Because, honestly, life wasn't easy. Between my job struggles and Jamie's ongoing family issues, the future felt like a tangled mess. But the cats, they were a little constant in the storm. There was this one stray, a ginger tabby with a crooked tail we'd nicknamed Rusty. He was the shyest of the bunch, and for weeks he wouldn't come near us. But one night Jamie stayed out late, sitting quietly on the stoop, whispering soft reassurances. I watched from the window, heart swelling when Rusty finally inched closer and let Jamie pet him. That moment, when they trust you, it's everything, Jamie said later, eyes shining. Makes all the struggle worth it. And struggle there was. Jamie's parents hadn't backed down. We'd gotten a few terse messages, reminders that their support was conditional, that Jamie needed to grow up and stop wasting time. It hurt him deeply, but he never let it break him. Instead, he focused on building a life that felt authentic, even if it meant pushing through the hard parts alone. One night, after a long day of job hunting, Jamie and I sat on the fire escape, the city lights twinkling around us. We were sharing a thermos of cheap coffee and laughing at some ridiculous cat video I'd found. I never thought I'd find someone who gets all this, The messy, the quiet, the in-between, Jamie said, his voice soft. I reached for his hand, fingers intertwining. Me neither. The world felt enormous and intimidating outside our little bubble, but moments like that made it feel manageable. Then came the unexpected. One afternoon, during a routine trip to the community center to drop off some food for the cats, Jamie bumped into an old friend from college, a guy named Eric who worked for a local nonprofit focusing on animal welfare. Eric's eyes lit up when he saw Jamie. "Jamie, it's been a while. Still feeding strays?" Jamie laughed. "Yeah, it's kind of my thing." Eric nodded, looking thoughtful. "You know, we're looking for volunteers to help with a new outreach program. Maybe you'd be interested?" Jamie's face brightened. Hope flickered. Maybe this was the break he needed, a way to turn his passion into something more tangible. He called me that night, voice buzzing with excitement. "Matt, this could be it. A chance to make a real difference, and maybe show my parents that I'm serious." I was proud of him, so proud. This wasn't just the boy who fed cats in the rain anymore. This was someone carving a path forward. We celebrated that night with takeout and cat cuddles, the apartment feeling full of possibility. But even as we looked ahead, the tension with Jamie's family lingered like a shadow. One evening, his mom called. The conversation was polite but distant, a quiet reminder that acceptance wasn't guaranteed. After the call, Jamie sank into the couch, exhaustion etching his features. "I want them to see me, Matt, not just who they want me to be." I pulled him close, whispering, "They're missing out, but you're not alone." That night, as we fell asleep to the gentle purring of our feline roommates, I realized that love wasn't about fixing everything. It was about standing together in the uncertainty, feeding hope one small moment at a time. And with Jamie by my side, I knew we could face whatever came next. Months passed, and slowly, things began to shift. Jamie started volunteering regularly with Eric's nonprofit, and I watched with quiet pride as he found a new rhythm, one that honored his love for the cats and gave him purpose beyond our little circle. It wasn't an instant fix for the tension with his parents, but it was progress. More importantly, it was Jamie stepping into his own life with confidence. One crisp evening, we were back at our usual spot feeding the strays, the city's hum softened by the cool air. The crooked-eared tabby, now sporting her little bell collar, wove between our legs, purring like a tiny engine. Jamie looked over at me, that familiar gentle smile lighting up his face. He said, "I never imagined that feeding stray cats would lead me here, with you, building something real." I chuckled softly. "Neither did I, but I'm glad it did." He reached out, threading his fingers through mine. "It feels like we've come a long way, from two strangers in the rain to this." I squeezed his hand, feeling the steady beat of his pulse beneath my skin. "It's been messy, sure, but it's been ours." In that moment, surrounded by the soft glow of streetlights and the quiet company of cats, I realized how much this connection had grown, not just into something romantic, but into a deep, grounding friendship that made the city feel less lonely. Later, as we walked back to the apartment, Jamie paused and looked up at me. "I don't know what the future holds. My family might never fully understand, and there will be more hard days. But with you, I feel like I can face them." I smiled, brushing a stray hair from his forehead. "We'll face them together." And that was enough. A quiet promise between two people who found each other in the most unexpected way, through scraps of food and shared moments under the city's indifferent sky. Feeding the stray cats had started as a small act of kindness, but it became the thread that wove our lives together. And sometimes, the smallest threads make the strongest fabric. As we turned the corner, hand in hand, I felt something warm settle in my chest. A sense of home, not tied to a place, but to someone who truly cared. And honestly, that's all I ever wanted.